Good morning, ladies and gentlemen. My name is Cadet Second Class Kylie Swartz. It is my honor to welcome you to the 31st Annual National Character and Leadership Symposium, and specifically to our virtual panel with the crew of SpaceX's Polaris Dawn mission. Due to training requirements, the Polaris Dawn crew is unable to make it in person here today. However, they will be joining us live from Hawthorne, California, with our moderator, Cadet Second Class Luca Valenti. Unfortunately, Jared Isaacman, the mission commander, is unable to join us this morning. It is now my pleasure to introduce 3 of the 4 crew members of the Polaris Dawn crew. Retired Lieutenant Colonel Scott "Kid" Poteet, mission pilot for Polaris Dawn, has served 20 years in various roles, including commander of the 64th Aggressor Squadron and U.S. Air Force Thunderbird demonstration pilot. He has over 3,200 flying hours and has logged over 400 hours of combat time. Following his Air Force career, Poteet served in various roles to include Director of Business Development at Drake International and Vice President of Strategy at Shift 4. He has recently served as the Mission Director of Inspiration 4 alongside Mr. Isaacman. Sarah Gillis, Mission Specialist for Polaris Dawn, is a SpaceX lead space operations engineer and responsible for overseeing the company's astronaut training program. She prepared NASA astronauts for the first Demo 2 and Crew 1 missions, and most recently directly trained the Inspiration 4 astronauts. Gillis is an experienced mission control operator who has supported real-time operations for Dragon's cargo resupply missions to and from International Space Station as a navigation officer and as a crew communicator for Dragon's human spaceflight missions. Anna Menon, mission specialist and medical officer for Polaris Dawn, is a SpaceX lead space operations engineer. She manages the development of crew operations and serves mission control as a mission director and crew communicator. During her tenure at SpaceX, she led the implementation of Dragon's crew capabilities and developed critical operational protocols in response to vehicle emergencies. Menon served in mission control during multiple Dragon missions prior to SpaceX. Menon worked for 7 years at NASA as the International Space Station biomedical flight controller. Please direct your attention to the screen for a Polaris Dawn video.
There has always been something in human nature to go explore. It inspires people to do things and to create things that we had never thought were possible. The space environment is kind of the last place we can still explore.
Man begins the greatest adventure in his history.
We are embarking on the second great age of exploration. There's going to be families on the moon. There's going to be a colony on Mars.
Our first mission is Polaris Dawn. Spaceflight is going to be a reality for all mankind. Similar to getting on a 747, flying to another continent, we have visions of doing the same thing with SpaceX.
It's 4 people that are not from NASA that are going to go up and open this door to the worlds beyond ours. Questions that human beings have been asking themselves since the beginning of time are probably answered in the worlds beyond our own. You have to start somewhere.
We share our story, we share this mission with the public, and you start to see how that is inspiring the next generation. It's contagious.
I am honored to now turn it over to our panel moderator, Cadet Second Class Luca Valenti and the Polaris Dawn crew.
Good morning, Cadet Wing. We're here at SpaceX, and it is an amazing privilege for me to be with the Polaris Dawn crew from SpaceX. And we're going to get started with the questions right away. The first question I have is, Could you describe the primary objectives of the Polaris Dawn mission and how your individual expertise contribute to achieving these goals?
Well, I think it's only pertinent to talk about how we started this journey on space exploration. It began with Inspiration 4. You know, our fearless commander, Jared Isaacman, had a passion for aviation, and that evolved into, you know, a passion for space. Began conversations with SpaceX on how we can contribute. So he became the commander of the first all-civilian mission to space. It was a 2-year venture. 2 years ago, it raised $250 million in support of St. Jude, who was our partner on this journey. But ultimately, the end result was we proved that anyone can go to space because these doors are going to begin to open up, and that was kind of the catalyst for this follow-on program, Polaris. The first mission is Polaris Dawn, that we are the crew members for, and we have 4 primary objectives for Polaris Dawn. We're going to complete the first commercial spacewalk. We can talk about more. We're going to set an altitude record, and we're also going to test Starlink from space for the very first time. We also have about 40 science and research experiments lined up for this. And the ultimate goal is to, this is an operational, a developmental mission program, because we want to identify certain challenges that we all face in order to continue to push the envelope and expand space exploration. And we want to contribute as much as we possibly can, so that's why we started with the Polaris Dawn mission with these objectives.
That's awesome, and it does feel like we're pushing the boundaries, seeing what's going on here and the things that they're building and everything. So I guess I have a quick question for you, Colonel Scott. What has been the key to transitioning from a Thunderbird Air Force pilot to various leadership roles, including being the mission director on Inspiration 4, and ultimately becoming an astronaut? You
know, I would say my evolution to becoming an astronaut is not traditional whatsoever, but things are changing. It's truly a dynamic world that we're living in as we continue to expand commercial space exploration. I had great experiences and blessed to have the things I was able to accomplish in the Air Force with the Thunderbirds, the weapons school graduates, and commanding and flying the F-16 for 20 years. And that certainly set me up for what I'm experiencing now. You know, but as we look forward, we got to figure out how we'll continue to expand this world where all can journey amongst the stars. And that's one of the ultimate goals. And that's what we proved with Inspiration 4, with Jared commanding that mission. You know, we selected an amazing crew, but it was random. And it was very successful. And that's exactly what we're looking at for the future itself. So we're just happy to be a part of this program. We're looking forward to our mission.
That's awesome. How would you say, and anyone can take this, how would you say becoming an astronaut has changed your life? Or when you got delivered the news that you were going to be part of this mission, what changes happened in your life?
I think, so all of us were involved in the Inspiration 4 mission in some capacity, and so we all knew each other pretty well prior to actually finding out we were going to be a crew. But it's been an incredible journey to start actually learning how to work together as a crew in this really unique environment of space. You know, we're bringing together 4 skill sets that have a ton of experience kind of across the board, from kid flying F-16s for so many years, Anna being a mission director in mission control, running the operation for our Dragon spacecraft, and kind of bringing my knowledge of training crew members to live in Dragon, and Jared's expertise of actually having flown in Dragon before, and bringing a team together and learning how to leverage the skills that each person is bringing to make kind of the best team we possibly can out of each individual's skill sets. I think that's been something super unique in this process, is actually starting to see how we form this team and really leverage what each person is bringing. So for me, that's been really cool to be on the other side, from no longer training other crews, but kind of self-reflecting and training ourselves as a crew, and getting to build and grow as a team together. That's been really one of my favorite parts of this entire process.
That's awesome. So we touched upon the training the astronauts. What do you think is going to change in your approach to training astronauts once you do go to space and then come back?
It's a great question. I think that's kind of the million-dollar question of me going and actually seeing for the first time what it's like to live and work and operate in this environment. I am super excited to see what we're doing well, what we're doing not well. We have a lot of great feedback from the crews we have flown that they feel as if they are still in the simulator when they get to space. And that's a testament to them really being prepared and feeling comfortable in the spacecraft. But we haven't really sent somebody that has trained the crew member. It's one of the few kind of careers where we don't have instructors that have been to space. So I think it will be a huge learning experience, and hopefully there are many improvements we can bring back to both our training and our operations here at SpaceX for the future of human space travel. And then also how we can apply that into the future, where if you look towards the future of Starship and we're bringing more and more people to space and opening access to space, how do we need to change our training, and how do we need to modify what we're doing to ensure safety and ensure everybody knows their roles and what they need to do to be successful?
And we're really rooting for you at the Air Force Academy to bring all of these innovations. And we're very excited to see what you can accomplish in this mission. So, and I think I have a question for you. Could you describe the multiple medical phenomena for long space flight that you have to address? And can you share your thoughts on one specific experiment you're most excited to perform on board and its potential impact on future space exploration?
Absolutely. So there are a lot of challenges that the human faces in spaceflight. And I'll give a couple of examples, but this barely scratches the surface of all of the problems that we need to solve as a society in order to actually have people living in space for extended durations of time on, for example, the surface of Mars. So there's a lot of good learning in our future together. One of the big problems that happens to people when they first experience microgravity is something called space motion sickness. So between 60 to 80% of people experience this motion sickness that can, lead to disorientation, nausea, vomiting, etc. And it is, so far, we are not able to predict well who will be afflicted by this. And so just because you get motion sickness on the ground doesn't mean you'll get it in space, and vice versa. And so we are doing experiments to try to better understand what are the triggers, what are the ways what causes people to experience the space motion sickness, so that we can better help mitigate that for people and anticipate for that for people. If you imagine sending a starship of 100 people into space, and all of a sudden when you get up there, 80 of them are floating around and vomiting, that's a really big problem to deal with. And so, this is, it is actually a serious thing that we as people have to figure out when we are thinking about sending lots and lots of people into space. Another big problem that we face as humans in space is something called spaceflight-associated neuroocular syndrome. So it's SANS is the acronym for it, but it's an eyesight challenge. And so what we have figured out over the course of maybe the last 10 to 20 years is that astronauts, as they are experiencing the environment of space for longer durations of time, they start to have vision problems. And so again, if you imagine people traveling 9 months to get to the surface of Mars, and then when they get there, they actually can't see well anymore. That's a serious problem. You're not going to be able to do the work you need to do, be able to be as safe as you need to be in that environment. And so there's a lot of research that is already being done, for example, on an International Space Station by NASA, by by a lot of different people to try to investigate this syndrome, to try to understand what are the mechanisms that are causing it to happen. But we are tackling some additional research on our mission that will help to better understand this. So one experiment that I'm really excited about is an experiment in which we wear a contact lens that has a pressure transducer in it and allows us to measure the changes in intraocular pressure of our eye as we especially experience that initial adaptation into microgravity, and then can continue to get measurements over an extended period of time. So some of the research that's being done thus far, you can get specific data points in specific moments of time, but this specific experiment will allow long duration data and help us to better understand, hopefully, what is that change in intraocular pressure, which is theorized to be one of the mechanisms behind these eye changes.
That's really interesting. I think I saw a couple of the pictures with the cyborg eye. Yeah. I was very excited.
We love it too.
Okay, well, I guess another important question to ask is, in space, the unique challenges faced by the Polaris Dawn crew go beyond the technical hurdles that we just talked about, touching on deeper aspects of what it means to be human, from having diverse perspectives to understanding our place in the universe. What unexpected challenge do you anticipate might bring these human elements to the forefront? And how do you plan to address it to enhance your mission and leadership in such an extraordinary setting?
You know, I think one of the realities of dynamic operations are that you can't actually predict everything. And so a significant portion of our training has been training us to be able to respond to unexpected situations, uncomfortable situations, and stay focused and execute with precision. And so the point of that is so that if and when you encounter something that's unexpected in spaceflight, you have both the tools as an individual and as a team to work together to solve that. And so to give some examples of the training we've been through to train this skill, is we climbed a mountain together, a Cotopaxi volcano in Ecuador, and that required a lot of, grueling climbing over the course of many hours in really uncomfortable situations, and required us to really stay focused, really, assume positive mantras to be able to keep going in the face of adversity and challenge, lean on each other as a team to work through kind of unexpected situations that arose. So that really drilled that skill at the very beginning of our training together. And then later on, about a year ago, we actually did some fantastic training with the Air Force Academy, where we got to participate in the AM490 program. And this, to me, was one of the highlights of our entire training program. We went through, thanks to a team of cadets, the training drills over the course of several days to learn both nominal and contingency emergency procedures that are required for jumping. We got put to the test and drilled until we had everything down to the appropriate satisfaction of our cadets that were testing us and grading us. And then we were taken up in a plane and we were told to stand in the door. And so we stood in the door and we then released and executed the training that had been drilled into us so thoroughly. Released our parachutes, navigated back down to the drop zone and landed safely. But what really stood out to me from that was that there were all sorts of emotional, experiences in those moments. So, the normal butterflies, even fears and anxiety that one would feel when you're about to let go and jump out of a plane alone for the first time hit. But then you have to push through that and stay focused and execute with precision in order to stay alive and get to the other side safely. And so it was a really fantastic firsthand experience of putting to the test that ability to focus in a high stress, high consequence environment and get to the other side safely.
That's awesome. Shout out to the Wings of Blue for letting me do that.
Just one thing to comment on as far as the training is concerned. We took a template, all the great things that NASA has accomplished, truly standing on the shoulders of giants. So we took a lot of those elements of training, the centrifuge, flying fighter jets, which is always fun, and jumping and simulator training. But this is a developmental program. We're trying to accomplish things that will continue to push the envelope and identify these challenges. So we're fortunate to go on this mission, but there are thousands of SpaceX employees, engineers in this building that are putting this mission set together. And the fact that it's developmental, it's a very unique perspective to have, coming from 20 years in the Air Force flying fighters, and now seeing what this generation is doing, what you guys will do in the future in the Space Force, and in the commercial world. It's absolutely amazing what these engineers are accomplishing. Just take the simple fact that we're doing the first commercial EVA, incorporating 4 individuals that are going to be participating in this EVA for the first time. It required the development of a spacesuit. We started with a baseline, the IBA suit they currently use to get to and from the station, and they created the first generation EVA suit. And to do that in such a short period, a year and a half from beginning to end, it takes a truly dedicated and very smart team of individuals to accomplish that. So we're excited to showcase all these accomplishments in our mission, hopefully this summer. But yeah.
So you touched upon the EVA, and I figured this out yesterday, extravehicular activity. So can you talk us through how this is going to unfold, what it's going to involve? I've heard that the cabin is going to be depressurized.
Yeah, absolutely. So what's apparent when you think about the Dragon spacecraft is that we don't have an airlock. So when you think of a spacewalk on the International Space Station, crew members go into the airlock, perform a pre-breathe in a higher oxygen environment, and then go out into space. And you only have to depressurize the airlock to have a transit path between the vacuum of space and the inside pressure environment of the space station. We don't have that in the Dragon spacecraft. So what it looks like for us is we have to perform first a kind of long extended pre-breathe, slowly decreasing cabin pressure and increasing oxygen concentration to help mitigate decompression sickness risk once we do go to vacuum. And then that will extend over probably 48 hours prior to the point in our mission where we're ready for the spacewalk. When we actually go to perform it, as you mentioned, we'll have to then vent the entire spacecraft to vacuum. So all 4 of us will get in our suits. It basically becomes your little spaceship volume around you and depressurize the entire cabin volume on the interior. From there, we'll have 2 crew members that actually proceed outside the vehicle and then come back in, close the hatch, and repressurize the vehicle. This is huge. I mean, what SpaceX has undertaken to modify the Dragon spacecraft to support this, it has taken an entire team of, as Kid said, incredibly brilliant people over here that are working tirelessly to create this system. And it's not just the spacesuit, which is in itself so cool to see the technology progression happen. But you now have new systems like a nitrogen repressurization system on the interior of the capsule required to repressurize the spacecraft once we're done with the EVA. You have new mobility aids around the interior so that we can, have stuff to interface with in a pressurized suit, fighting the pressure environment. You have to make sure the interfaces actually support movement in the suit. There's so many modifications that have had to be made to the spacecraft to support this. You might not think about it, but you even care about all the materials in the spacecraft. When you take stuff to vacuum, they start outgassing. There's chemicals that break down inside the materials and leave toxins in the atmosphere. So we have to go and look at everything on the interior of the spacecraft, bake a lot of it out, put it in a vacuum before launch so that some of those toxins comes out ahead of time. But there's so many details that the SpaceX team is really diligently working through to even accomplish this feat. So far, only governments, countries have accomplished a spacewalk. So it's a huge step forward to be at the point where we have a first generation EVA suit that we'll be testing. kind of similarly to the super early missions on the Gemini and Apollo missions, this will be an umbilical fed spacewalk. So all of the consumables for our suit will be fed through umbilicals to the suit sourced from the spacecraft. So it's going to be incredibly cool. There will be hopefully some opportunity for people to tune in and actually watch it as it happens during the mission, which will be very cool to share with the world, but just an incredible accomplishment by the team overall making it happen.
And we spent a lot of time training, obviously, for the EVA. That's the reason why we're unable to, be there in person is the dive to fly restriction. We spent the entire day yesterday pressurized, rehearsing the EVA.
So I'm thinking about the depressurized atmosphere that's going to be happening. I'm big on food, right? So what's going to happen to the food that you have to eat when you take the atmosphere out of the capsule?
That was another thing they had to think about. Yeah. So absolutely, just an example of the many challenges that the team has had to work through when you contemplate doing this operation. So on our mission, we'll get to fly some fresh food, and we will get to eat that basically leading up to the EVA, which we anticipate to occur on flight day 3. So we will enjoy all that fresh food, and then on the other side of the EVA, it'll be more like camping food, and they are doing a lot of testing to just make sure that it survives vacuum and will still be fine on the other side of it.
Junky.
That is good to know.
Coffee, very important.
Okay, so we talked about some fresh food, right? So I know we're doing something with the Air Force Academy that involves plants.
Mm-hmm.
What is it? Can you talk us more about that portion of the research?
Yeah, absolutely. We're super excited to get to fly an experiment led by the USAFA team. And it's an experiment called Leo plants. And basically it's an experiment that is investigating the effects of magnetism on plant growth in microgravity. And so I think it's one of our great joys that we get to take a little bit of Earth with us into space and get to have this life with us and get to watch and observe the different growth of these plants while we're up there together, and then bring back some hopefully great data for you guys.
We actually just added another one too that you guys participated in. It's a VR training simulator. There's absolutely no competition whatsoever amongst us, but we actually get to compete against each other. And the idea is it's a simulator with VR training, and it's to do some assessments and evaluation on deconditioning of skill sets. So we'll do before and after to see if there's any degradation in our skill sets. But we'd like to compete against each other.
I have a question for you, Anna. So you worked at NASA for 7 years, and I'd like to know, did you notice any difference in the way NASA and SpaceX approach engineering problems?
I think the neat thing that I have observed in working both at NASA and at SpaceX is that they have different approaches to problems and different backgrounds, but those two skill sets work fantastically hand in hand. SpaceX has had the great privilege of getting to work side by side, hand in hand with NASA in the development of the Dragon 1 vehicle, Dragon 2 vehicle, flying our first humans to space. These were NASA astronauts that we flew. And, SpaceX didn't do that in a vacuum. They did it through careful, thorough work with the NASA team, working through requirements, working through analysis to make sure that the development of our vehicles was safe and correct, and learning from the lessons that NASA has had over the course of 60 years of human spaceflight. And so, I think the thing that stands out to me as I reflect on my time at NASA and now time at SpaceX is just the enormous amount of experience and wisdom that really, especially the NASA program has and SpaceX is learning from, and the fantastic engineers that exist in both places, and what we gain when we are able to work together as a team in solving problems.
And maybe to add to that, even in our mission, we are continuing to learn from NASA through this. We're, similarly learning whatever we can with respect to, for the spacewalk, they have experience depressurizing spacecraft on the early Gemini and Apollo missions. So taking all of their lessons learned over the years. And, we did a pre-breathe test at Johnson Space Center with NASA to understand what we needed to do from a pre-breathe perspective. And we'll be back at JSC to do a suit test. It's called a suit acceptance test prior to going to space, where we will actually take these suits into a vacuum chamber and try them here on Earth in a vacuum at Johnson Space Center as well. So definitely, it's an incredible partnership, as Anna said, between NASA and SpaceX to help continue driving forward and making sure we're doing it safely.
Yes, absolutely. And let's go back to the big picture. This is an important question. Why is it important for humans to physically go to space rather than to rely on robotic systems that, have less needs in terms of food and other things?
You're really diving in there, aren't you?
I think it's part of intrinsic human nature to go and explore. And there's not many places left on Earth that you can still do that. But I think it is absolutely part of human nature to want to go and explore. And it inspires people. So there is an incredibly inspirational nature to continuing to push boundaries and go farther and see the universe and discover more about who we are and why we're here. And that's certainly something you can't get in robotics, and you can't get from a rover looking at the surface. So I think that will always exist in humanity, is our desire to go and explore and be among the stars. I don't know, you guys have other thoughts, but.
I just think, you said it well when we were chatting recently that, when you think about whether you'd send a robot to the beach to experience it for you or whether you'd want to be there yourself, I think that was a great example of like the intrinsic human nature to see the beauty of our world and our universe.
Yes, I was saying, well, if you want to go on vacation, do you want to go with the robot or do you want to go yourself? I definitely want to go myself to the beach, so I guess.
And we'll continue to be good stewards. People talk about it's an insurance policy, based on trying to be good stewards of this planet and take care of it. But we can do both. We're going to focus on that. We're going to put resources towards that. But we need to explore what's out there beyond the stars. It's human nature, as Sarah alluded to. It's curiosity, and it's the responsibility is all of ours to not only take care of our planet, but to explore and get out there and see what exists.
Yes. This is definitely super inspiring for all of us, and I think we all, in a certain extent, want to explore as cadets everything that the world has to offer. And you are definitely an inspiring part of our journey at the Air Force Academy. And another question I'd like to ask you, Colonel Scott, he told me to call him Kid. It's just very...
Kid!
It's difficult for me to call him Kid. So he was telling me yesterday that he ran 50 miles and 30 miles without a shoe. First of all, how do you do that? And second of all, what does that bring to the Polaris Dawn mission? How do you instill that type of grit to everyone else?
I don't even know how to answer that and tie it back to space. So we're going to talk space. But you talk about physical fitness. That's and what Anna was talking about with trying to exist in space. It's an austere environment. There's no gravity. There's loneliness. You're very distant from a planet where the humans exist. There's the vacuum. There's temperature deviations. That's and we're human bodies that need to move in order to exist. That's why the ISS, they dedicate 2.5, 3 hours of physical fitness daily. And that's all challenges we got to figure out, because right now, you talk about 6 months on the ISS, to get to Mars, 8 months plus you're going to stay there for a certain duration and you got to come home. There's another 8 months. So we're talking years in this austere environment. How do we exist? How do we continue to thrive? And that's why we identify the 40 science and research experiments that we're going to accomplish. What are those challenges? How do we overcome some of those hurdles? We're fairly limited on capacity, and there's certain resources that, with payload, power, as well as a duration of 5 days for our mission, and then you have the fact that we're going to open up the hatch, so there's a vacuum consideration. Based on those limitations, we were able to identify those 40 experiments that we're going to focus in on. But, you know, back to the whole fitness thing, you know, you got to figure it out. Actually, one cool experiment that Anna's going to be working on is CPR. How do you perform CPR in a microgravity environment? It's difficult because you apply force, you're going to go the other direction. So simple things like that we got to think about, and that's the whole reason why this is a developmental program, and we dedicate a lot of our training time to figure out how we're going to execute in space.
So who's going to have the CPR performed on? Okay. So, okay, well, sorry. What does a day in the life of an astronaut looks like? And I was asking yesterday, do you all live here or do you come here together for training? How does that aspect work?
We actually live in 4 different places around the country, and so when we do have training weeks, we all come together at the SpaceX headquarters in Hawthorne, California, and the fantastic training team here and the engineers here, we work with them to go through our training program. A day in the life looks really different every day, which is, I think, one of the really exciting parts about it. So we are taught at the beginning the kind of foundation of the spaceship that we are living in. And so that's the Dragon spacecraft. So we learn all of the different systems and what they do and how they function and what would happen perhaps in a nominal setting. And then we start layering that with different contingencies, better understanding what the appropriate operational responses are to those contingencies. We go through specialized training, for example, with the research experiments we do, the spacewalk training. We make sure to tackle those individual, unique kinds of pieces of our program and make sure we're ready for those. And then we put it all together in a simulation setting. And so we do simulations with the 4 of us in a capsule simulator that basically looks like the spaceship, but it's sitting here on the ground. And we work through problems as a team, and then we add in the ground team, and we call those joint simulations. And we have this fantastic team in mission control combined with the crew in the spacecraft, and we have trainers, which is what Sarah did in her previous life, and they are throwing anomalies at us right and left. And these simulations are basically supposed to put to the test all of this foundation that we've just built over the course of a long period of time and train us in being able to see how we respond to those unexpected situations, but then also how we work together as a larger team and solve problems. And so, as you can see, there's a lot of facets to the day in the life, and it looks different every day, that every day is an experience of learning and growth, both technically and as a team.
So if you had to give some words of wisdom to us cadets, there's a lot of cadets that really want to become astronauts, and they're amazing at everything they do. And if you had to give some words of advice, I guess even Colonel Scott, to us kids, to us, or even to AOCs that are training us, since you were an AOC at the Air Force Academy, what words of wisdom would you give them?
Words of wisdom. Well, you know, as far as wanting to be an astronaut, certainly not traditional path for actually any of us. And certainly for you guys in the future, it won't be, you know, the historical way of doing it, you know, the NASA way. The fighter pilots were kind of an old breed as far as making that progression to an astronaut. It's going to be about having engineer skill sets. How do we develop the lunar surface on Mars? Medical, long durations. You know, you got to figure out how to triage in space and deal with, you know, everyday medical considerations in healthcare. So those certain skill sets are going to be critical for these longer duration missions in the future. As far as words of wisdom, you know, what I experienced throughout my career, it's truly about the relationships that you build. You know, you're going to develop the skill sets necessary in the Air Force, Space Force. But it's those relationships that you build, not burning bridges, you know, taking care of your people, and, you know, focused in on the task at hand. I never predicted I'd be an astronaut. Dude, before I even joined the Air Force, I airsick, scared of heights. I still get, you know, stick me in the back of an Uber, I'm done. But hopefully I do okay in space. But, you know, I had a passion for flying. I pursued it. I, you know, was very fortunate, ended up getting F-16s. But it was the relationships that I built over time that helped me accomplish the goals that I'd set forth. And hopefully the stars align for what you want to pursue, but never burn those bridges and take care of your people and build those relationships.
Absolutely. So if you could walk us through one of the particular obstacles that you've faced so far as you were training for this mission. For example, I know the mission was supposed to happen a lot sooner than it did. Did that change your plans at all for the future, or in particular of what you expected out of the training?
That's interesting. Yeah, I think we've been on this journey now for over 2 years since we were first announced on the crew. But I think for me, it's so fascinating to be involved in this development process where we're starting with an idea, we're going through the entire hardware development cycle, and then through to execution in space. And that's so unique, and it obviously comes with so many challenges. This is a huge undertaking by SpaceX to develop and test and understand all the pieces that need to come together. And so it's understandable that it's taken time, and you know, you go and you test and you learn something. And so then you have to modify the hardware or change the operation. And that's the iterative design cycle that we're in right now as we slowly get closer to a real launch date. But it's so cool to watch, and also so important. You know, we need to do this safely, we need to do it the right way. And so it's just an immense privilege to get to work with the SpaceX team through this development cycle, tackling the challenge that they face and helping to build what will hopefully be a very successful mission and operation. I think it's always disappointing when you think your launch date is 6 months out and it's not 6 months out. But it's certainly allowed us a lot more opportunity to train as a team and to build our skills together to form the crew that we will ultimately fly with together.
I think keeping up with these guys. You'll see images of us training and we're all laughing. No, they're laughing at me. Because we sit in these simulators, it's again, back to the whole, it's a developmental program. There's some basic skill sets we got to learn. I got to learn. You know, Jared's flown the aircraft before. Anna, you know, is coming from SpaceX engineer. She's an MD, mission director. So she knows the systems in and out. She designs and writes the checklist procedures. And then obviously Sarah, she taught Jared how to be an astronaut. And then you got Kid. Kid's got a degree in outdoor education. So I'm definitely not the brightest one in the simulator, and those are the images you see of them laughing at me. But it's certainly, you know, it's for a purpose. We need to continue to push. So once we get those basic skill sets down, we're working to figure out how to do those next steps so we can, you know, get to eventually Starship and these further missions, so for sure.
And you don't get to discredit the operational skills you are bringing to this.
Absolutely.
Oh, go on. Come on.
I really do wish.
Polaris Dawn crew and Cadet Valenti, thank you for sharing your conversation with us. We will now open the floor for questions from the audience. Please ensure your questions are concise, as I may have to repeat them for the panel.
Cadet Pass, I was wondering what the additional benefits and associated risk factors of depressurizing the entire cabin as opposed to just depressurizing an airlock like a conventional spacecraft were.
Yeah, there's definitely obviously a huge trade where you're taking the entire spacecraft to vacuum. Unfortunately, we don't have an option. We don't have an airlock and we can't fit one in the architecture of our spacecraft. So there is absolutely different considerations you need to make. For instance, we can't just pre-breathe 100% oxygen to help mitigate our decompression sickness risk. Because if you were to do that, you're flowing oxygen out into a small spacecraft, and very quickly you'd approach flammability concerns in the spacecraft. So that's just one example of how we have to take a different approach to help mitigate that risk, where you have a long, extended duration pre-breathe, where you're slowly decreasing cabin pressure and increasing oxygen concentration to lower the nitrogen in your system over time, before doing a much shorter 100% oxygen pre-breathe to finally flush the remaining nitrogen out of your system. So there's absolutely many challenges that come with just depressurizing the entire spacecraft. I think if we had an airlock, it would be a much simpler proposition, but that's certainly the challenge in making sure we understand each aspect, what we need to test on the spacecraft to mitigate the risks. I talked about the off-gassing materials, for instance. So as we work through each portion of the spacecraft to understand what we have to go test or prepare to make sure it's a safe environment. But it's a very unique self-isolated spacecraft that we're taking to vacuum, and that's the architecture we're working with.
Thank you.
all this training going into just training Q4 for Polaris Dawn. So with the advent of the Starship and SpaceX hoping to transport like thousands and hundreds at a time of humans into space, where do you see the future of human spaceflight training going with so many more...
Kylie, could you please repeat the question for us?
Yeah, sorry. So with like the advent of Starship and so many like hundreds of more people that will be going into human spaceflight, where do you see the future of human spaceflight training going with so many more people to focus on?
We can't hear the question.
Okay, so the question was, with hundreds and maybe more people going into spaceflight, how do you see spaceflight training in the future?
Oh man, maybe I'll start with that one. As you start thinking ahead towards hundreds of people flying to space, it's an entire paradigm shift. Kind of think of the before 737 aircraft and after, where suddenly you're transporting so many more people. I really think what we are doing today for spaceflight training is going to drastically change. And instead, you have to start breaking it down by role. And not everybody is going to be able to know every system and master every part of the spacecraft. So I really do think it will transition more towards, you have a flight crew, you have maybe a pilot or a commander that is responsible at the, say, flight deck, for instance, and then you have a medical officer, you have an engineer, you have a technician, or whatever the roles are to make this mission successful in a much shorter training timeline. You can't train hundreds of people to the capacity that we've trained people historically to go to space. So I think it will absolutely be a paradigm shift where you have a flight crew that supports you, and then you have hopefully a passenger experience for many people where you can basically buy your ticket and get on the spaceship and go to space, and be supported and safe in the way you need to, because you do have specific individuals that are experts in what they need to know. I love thinking about that future. I mean, we'll get to create it over the next coming decades as this access does expand. So it's a really exciting concept and proposition.
And you see it, with our mission. You got NASA. It's 3 to 4 years of very, very intense training. And then once we started with Inspiration 4, the notification to the crew was in February, and then they launched in September. So they had a very short 8 months to figure out what was the requirements to be able to qualify to go to space. We've had a little bit more time, again, the developmental operational focus, but SpaceX is working it. They're looking at what is required for us to to safely operate, and all those considerations as they bring Starship online.
Thank you.
Hello everyone, Cadet 3rd Class Stephen Timperley. My question is for anybody. What part of the mission are you most nervous for, and what do you tell your family?
I would say that, I wouldn't say it's nervous, but I think that the part of the mission that has the, the highest complexity is the spacewalk. And we're doing it for the first time, testing new systems, new suit. And so it certainly has a high level of, thought and careful approach that we will use as we step into that operation. And both the team supporting us on the ground and us in the spacecraft, we will be, chair flying as we lead up to it. We will be, going through a lot of preparatory steps in the spacecraft as we get closer and closer to the actual execution of that operation. And so I think it'll be a really fantastic experience to kind of go through that intense operation together for the first time. In terms of our families, I think every family is different. I can speak for mine, and they're incredibly supportive, incredibly excited to, this is not an individual endeavor. This is an endeavor that we all go through as a family. And, as we're going through training, like, they are the support team. They're doing the hard part, actually. My husband's doing the hard parts, taking care of our kids, for example, while I'll be in space. And so, we have a philosophy of open communication within our family. And so we talk about this stuff. We talk to our kids. We have a couple of young kids, and we talk about, practicing for space. And to give an example, I got to bring my son to my spacesuit fitting out here in Hawthorne. And so he got to experience and see what a spacesuit looks like firsthand. I got to take him in our capsule simulator, and so he got to see, the kind of spaceship that Mom will be living in for 5 days. And because that opens up lines of communication for questions and being able to talk about this stuff openly. And so it's been, in my opinion, a great opportunity for growth together as a family.
It's definitely not easy, It's challenging in its different ways, and they're the unsung hero because they're supporting us at home. They don't get to see what we go through on a daily basis, training and all the different layers of safety that's put into this program. But it's important to maintain that communication. You guys will experience it when you deploy. You guys have families. Always keeping them plugged in on what you're doing when you can, share certain information. But making them a part of it is key, and that's important for the communication. But my kids are excited. My son's super fan for SpaceX. Girls, I have 2 girls. They were more interested on being on the documentary than Dad going to space. But you just got to keep that communication lines up there for sure.
Thank you.
We have time for one more question.
Oh no, I better make this good. I'm Cadet Quick, and I was wondering, what's the most important character trait that you all have had to develop or came walking into this in order to tackle the unique challenges ahead of you for this mission?
What immediately jumps to my brain is actually exactly what we just talked about in Open Lines of Comm with Family, is the ability to communicate. You are constantly working with so many different types of people, with engineers, with, all the people that are required to bring this together. And it's people. We're human. We have emotions. We have, desires and goals and dreams. And so being able to communicate your ideas and change your style of communication to ensure the person you're talking with or the group of people you're talking with is receiving the information, I think is essential. It doesn't matter what you're doing in any industry, but being able to articulate and communicate and bring people together or allow people to form themselves around an idea is so huge. And as we work as a crew, there's 4 of us in a tiny spacecraft together for 4 days. And so you also just need to be able to communicate your needs and communicate when you're uncomfortable or distressed or what you need at any given point. It's so essential for our mission, and that's kind of why we do some of these extreme training things even, is to build the skill set of communicating with each other. And yeah, I think that's what immediately popped into my brain for absolutely essential skill sets.
Humility, lose the egos. You know, it's coming from a fighter world and then into a totally different industry. It's humbling, to say the least, because these men and women are a hell of a lot smarter than I am. So you got to approach, you know, what you do in life with humility. So I think that was important for us.
Awesome, thank you so much.
Anna?
I would add teamwork for a lot of the same reasons that Sarah was describing. You're not going through this world alone, and whether in a spaceship or doing any of the thousands of different jobs out there, you are doing it with a team around you. And so the ability to work with people and, you know, communicate with them, build relationships, both in your personal life and your professional life, it's a critical skill.
Thank you all.
Polaris Dawn crew, thank you for taking time out of your busy schedule to speak with us today. We appreciate all of you joining us from California to share your experiences and your perspectives. It has been an honor to be able to learn from all of you before you lift off this spring. We look forward to hearing from you when you return. For those of you in the audience today, we encourage you to share your immediate feedback in the NCLS app. Select this session and click on the Rate Session button. Cadets, please check in for this session with the posted QR code. Thank you and have a great NCLS day.
Thank you so much.
Really?